The moment you stop reacting, something strange happens. The room changes. Not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. People shift in their seats. Their voices tighten, their confidence flickers for just a second, and most of them don't even know why. Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody teaches you. Power is not taken by force. It's lost through reaction. Every time you rush to explain yourself, justify your behavior, or correct a misunderstanding, you're not defending your reputation, you're giving away control. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He noticed something disturbing about human behavior. The person who feels compelled to explain is already operating from a lower position, because explanations are not neutral. They are submissions disguised as logic. Think about it. Who explains more, the judge or the accused, the leader or the follower, the one in control or the one afraid of losing it? Powerful people don't rush to clarify. They don't scramble to correct narratives. They don't panic when misunderstood. They let discomfort linger. And that discomfort does something dangerous to everyone else. Because silence creates a vacuum. And humans are wired to fill vacuums with assumptions, usually ones that favor the silent person. This is where most people make a fatal mistake. They believe silence makes them look guilty. They believe calm makes them look weak. They believe not responding means losing, so they talk. They over-explain. They defend their intentions. They offer context no one asked for. And in doing so, they reveal something power never forgives: need. Machiavelli warned that the one who needs to be understood has already surrendered leverage, because the moment you explain, you hand the other person the authority to judge whether your explanation is acceptable. You've placed yourself on trial. And here's the part two: hat stings. The people who pressure you to explain are rarely confused. They're probing. They want to see if you'll flinch, if you'll rush to repair their discomfort, if you'll lower yourself just enough to make them feel taller. This is why silence feels so threatening. When you don't explain, you deny them reassurance. When you don't react, you deny them control. When you don't defend yourself, you force them to sit with uncertainty. And uncertainty is deeply uncomfortable for people who rely on dominance, validation, or moral superiority. Machiavelli believed that discomfort is where power shifts. Not when you attack, not when you argue, but when you calmly refuse to play the role expected of you. This is the quiet move. It doesn't look aggressive. It doesn't look clever. It looks almost passive. But inside the other person, something starts unraveling. They begin talking more, explaining themselves, justifying their tone, clarifying their intent. The roles reverse. Suddenly, they are the ones seeking understanding. They are the ones trying to regain balance. And you didn't say a word. This is why silence is so often misinterpreted as confidence. Because confidence doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't need approval. It waits. But here's the danger most people don't see. Silence used incorrectly makes you invisible. Silence used emotionally makes you look wounded. Silence used strategically makes others uncomfortable and exposes their weakness. The difference is intent. In the next part, we're going to break down why people instinctively attack silence, how they try to bait you into reacting, and the exact moment when staying quiet flips the power permanently. Because once you understand when not to speak, you'll never feel pressured to defend yourself again. The first thing people do when silence doesn't work on you is try to provoke you. This is not accidental. It's instinct. When someone speaks and you don't respond the way they expect, their mind searches for an explanation. And if they can't find one, they assume the worst: loss of control. Machiavelli understood this pattern clearly. He wrote that when authority feels uncertain, it does not retreat, it tests. This is the test. The tone sharpens. The questions become loaded. The comments turn sarcastic or moral. Not because they're angry, but because they're uncomfortable. Silence removes their reference point. Most people rely on reaction to orient themselves socially. They read your face, your tone, your defense. When you deny them that feedback, they feel exposed. So they escalate. They accuse you of being rude. They imply guilt. They frame your silence as weakness or avoidance. This is bait, and nearly everyone bites. They rush to explain their intentions. They soften their posture. They reassure the other person. In doing so, they restore the other person's dominance. Machiavelli warned that the fastest way to lose power is to rush toward peace when the other person benefits from conflict, because conflict forces roles, and the one who explains is always playing defense. Here's the truth that flips the dynamic. Silence is not passive. It is active restraint. When you don't react, you're not surrendering control. You're forcing the other person to reveal theirs. Watch what happens when you hold the line. They talk more. They contradict themselves. They explain their intent unprompted. Why? Because humans cannot tolerate unanswered tension, and the one who breaks first is the one who loses position. This is why powerful people rarely clarify accusations immediately. They let narratives breathe. They allow discomfort to spread. They observe who panics and who overreaches. Because overreaction exposes motive, and motive is leverage. But there is a critical mistake people make here. They confuse silence with coldness. Coldness provokes retaliation. Silence invites projection. The difference is subtle but decisive. You remain calm, neutral, present. You don't withdraw emotionally. You simply don't feed the tension. This denies the other person the emotional payoff they're seeking. And when someone can't extract emotion, dominance, or reassurance from you, they start to feel naked. This is why silence feels disrespectful to insecure people. Not because it's rude, but because it denies them validation. Machiavelli believed that the most effective way to disarm an aggressor is to remove the role they expect you to play. No defense, no apology, no counterattack, just composure. But this raises a dangerous question. If silence is so powerful, why doesn't everyone use it? Because silence has a cost. It requires you to tolerate misunderstanding, to let others think what they want, to resist the urge to correct the record. Most people can't handle that. And that's exactly why silence works. In the next part, we'll expose the moment when silence becomes lethal to your position, and how to know when to finally speak. Because silence is a weapon. And like all weapons, timing decides everything. Silence doesn't fail because it's weak. It fails because people break it too early. This is the moment where most people sabotage themselves. They hold silence for a few seconds, maybe a minute, maybe a day. And then anxiety creeps in. Doubt starts whispering, what if they think I'm guilty? What if I look insecure? What if I lose this relationship? So they speak. And the power snaps back to the other side instantly. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. The value of silence is proportional to how long you can endure discomfort. Because silence isn't about muteness. It's about control over your impulse to self-correct. Here's what's really happening psychologically. When you don't defend yourself, the other person enters a loop. They expected resistance, apology, or explanation. When none comes, their mind starts working overtime. They replay what they said. They analyze their tone. They wonder if they crossed a line. And slowly, doubt turns inward. This is the reversal point. The power doesn't flip because you stayed quiet. It flips because they started explaining themselves. You'll notice it in subtle signs. They soften their language. They add disclaimers. They say things like, "I didn't mean it that way," or "Maybe I misunderstood." That's not clarity. That's retreat. Machiavelli warned that people reveal weakness not when they attack, but when they start justifying themselves unprompted. And silence is what forces that exposure. But here's the rule almost nobody teaches. You must break silence only when the other person has fully shown their hand. Not before, not during the test. After. If you speak while they're still probing, you reset the hierarchy. If you speak once they've begun justifying, you seal it. This is the timing that separates amateurs from operators. Your response, when it comes, must be minimal, calm, unemotional, almost disappointing. No long explanations, no emotional tone, no defense, just enough to end the tension on your terms. Because the goal of silence was never to punish. It was to reposition. Machiavelli believed that people remember who controlled the rhythm of an interaction, not who was right, not who was louder, but who decided when things moved forward. And silence is how you take control of that rhythm. But there is a final danger. If you use silence with ego, if you use it to dominate, if you use it to humiliate, it backfires. Silence works only when it's grounded, not performative. The moment it becomes a tactic you show, it loses its power. That's why the quiet move is so rare. It requires discipline, emotional control, and thus a willingness to let people misunderstand you, temporarily. Most people can't tolerate that, which is why most people stay trapped defending themselves. In the next part, we'll uncover the one situation where silence should never be used, and how misusing it can permanently damage your position. Because knowing when not to stay quiet is just as important as knowing when to say nothing. There is one situation where silence stops being power and starts becoming a liability. Machiavelli was very clear about this, even though most people misunderstand him. Silence is deadly only when you already have position. If you use it without position, it looks like avoidance. This is where many people ruin the move. They stay silent when their credibility is still being formed. They stay silent when a false narrative is being set publicly. They stay silent when the silence benefits the other side more than it benefits them. And power shifts against them. Here is the rule Machiavelli followed. Never let silence define you before you define yourself. Silence works best when people already sense your strength. When there is ambiguity about your status, silence lets others write the story for you. And once a story hardens, correcting it later costs 10 times more effort. This is why silence is not about never speaking. It's about speaking once, so you never have to speak again. Powerful people establish a baseline early. Calm, direct, minimal, enough to signal competence and authority. After that, they go quiet. Because now silence feels intentional, not defensive. This is the difference between a quiet leader and a quiet target. Machiavelli warned that power is cruel to those who hesitate at the wrong moment. If you fail to mark your position early, silence reads as submission. So when should you speak? You speak when. Facts matter more than emotions. A false accusation threatens long-term position. Silence would be interpreted as consent. Others are watching and forming judgment. But even then, you don't explain. You state. Short, controlled, final. No follow-up debate. No emotional language. No attempt to convince. Because explanation invites argument. Statement ends it. And once the statement is made, silence regains its power. Here's what most people don't realize. Silence is not the move. Contrast is the move. You speak once, then stop. That contrast is what makes people uneasy, They remember the authority of your statement. They feel the weight of your quiet afterward. They realize they can't pull you into reaction. This is when silence becomes intimidating instead of confusing. But there is another trap. Some people use silence to punish, to withhold, to show superiority. That creates enemies. Machiavelli never confused power with ego. True power doesn't need to humiliate. It needs to stabilize position. Silence should make others uncomfortable, not hostile, which leads to the final psychological turn. Once people realize they can't provoke you, can't bait you, can't force a reaction, they change tactics. They stop testing. They stop pushing. They start adjusting. And adjustment is respect in its rawest form. In the next part, we'll expose what happens after silence works, why people suddenly treat you differently, and how to lock that shift in permanently. Because flipping power once is easy. Keeping it is where most people fail. Once silence works, something subtle changes. People don't say it out loud, but they recalculate around you. Their tone shifts. Their requests soften. Their confidence becomes conditional. This is the moment most people misunderstand. They think silence earned them dominance. It didn't. It earned them uncertainty. And uncertainty is far more powerful than dominance. Machiavelli understood that power does not fear aggression. It fears unpredictability. The moment people realize they cannot read you, cannot provoke you, cannot pull emotion out of you, they stop treating you casually. But here's where almost everyone ruins it. They get excited. They start using silence as a weapon. They withhold responses to feel superior. They let ego creep in, and power slips away again. Why? Because silence only works when it looks natural, not strategic. The goal is not to intimidate. The goal is to become unreactive. There is a difference. When people sense you are performing silence, they feel challenged. When they sense you are genuinely unaffected, they feel unsettled. Machiavelli believed that the strongest position is emotional independence, not control over others, but freedom from their influence. This is the shift silence creates when used correctly. You stop responding to bait, not because you're trying to win, but because it no longer moves you. And people feel that. They begin to self-censor. They choose words carefully. They test less. Not out of fear, but out of respect for boundaries they can't penetrate. But here is the final danger of this phase. Silence changes how others treat you, but it also changes how you see yourself. If you start enjoying the discomfort you cause, you've crossed into ego. And ego always leaks. Machiavelli warned that power collapses fastest when it becomes self-aware. When you start using power instead of holding it, people sense it and push back. True silence is boring. It's calm. It's steady. It's unremarkable. That's why it works. You don't track who flinches. You don't wait for reactions. You don't savor control. You simply don't react. This makes you difficult to manipulate, not intimidating. And there's a critical cause, in sequence of this state. People stop trying to dominate you, but they also stop trying to impress you, because they sense you're not emotionally available for exchange. This places you outside many power games entirely, which is the highest position of all. But there's one last step Machiavelli implied but never wrote plainly. Silence alone is not enough. If you don't pair silence with movement, you stagnate. You become static. And static figures are eventually ignored. In the final part, we'll uncover how to combine silence with decisive action, so you're not just untouchable in moments of tension, but respected over time. Because the quiet move that makes others uncomfortable is only half the strategy. The other half decides whether you remain relevant or fade into the background. When silence starts working, the real test begins. Because now people don't push you the same way. They don't confront you openly. They don't accuse directly. They watch. They study how you move when you're not reacting. They look for patterns. They wait for a crack. Machiavelli understood this phase clearly. Once power realizes it can't provoke you, it tries to predict you instead. And prediction is how control returns. This is where silence alone is no longer enough. If you stay quiet but static, people eventually adjust. They map you. They grow comfortable again. And comfort kills leverage. That's why silence must be paired with unexpected movement. Not loud moves, not dramatic shifts. Small, decisive actions that don't match what others expect. You stop reacting, but you don't stop acting. You change routines without explanation. You redirect energy without justification. You make decisions calmly, without announcing motives. This creates a second layer of discomfort. Because now people can't read your emotions or your direction. Machiavelli believed this was the most dangerous position a person could occupy. Emotionally neutral, strategically mobile. At this point, something important happens. People stop trying to challenge you. They stop trying to test you. They start adjusting themselves around you, not because you demanded respect, but because they can't extract leverage. Silence removed their emotional control. Movement removed their strategic control. Together they create authority without force. But here's the warning Machiavelli would give you if he were alive today. Never explain the change. The moment you explain why you moved differently, you collapse the mystery. And mystery is what protects you. People don't need to understand you. They only need to factor you in. That's power. This is why the calmest people often dominate rooms without speaking much. Their presence carries uncertainty, and uncertainty forces others to behave carefully. No aggression, no dominance displays, no validation seeking, just quiet autonomy. And autonomy is what makes others uncomfortable, because it reminds them of something they don't like to admit. They don't control you. And once someone realizes that, they never interact with you casually again. They become precise, measured, respectful. Not because you scared them, because you made yourself unmanageable. This is the quiet move most people never learn. And once you master it, you'll notice something strange. You stop needing to prove anything. You stop defending yourself instinctively. You stop explaining your existence. You simply move. And the world adjusts. There's a moment when you realize something has changed. People don't interrupt you the same way anymore. They don't challenge you casually. They hesitate before making jokes at your expense. Not because you became louder, but because you became harder to move. Machiavelli understood that real power is not dominance. It's friction, the kind that makes others slow down when dealing with you. When you stop defending yourself consistently, people lose a familiar handle on you. They can't predict how you'll respond, and unpredictability forces caution. This is when a subtle shift happens inside them. They start explaining themselves first. They soften statements before you react. They add context you never asked for. That's not politeness. That's recalibration. Humans are wired to test boundaries. When a boundary doesn't react emotionally, the brain flags it as risky. Risky things are treated carefully. This is why the quiet move works across every hierarchy: work, relationships, social circles, even conflict. The loudest person is rarely the most powerful. The most reactive person is always the weakest. When you stop defending, you remove fuel. Accusations need resistance. Provocation needs emotion. Drama needs participation. Without those, it collapses under its own weight. But there is one final discipline that makes this permanent. You must stop caring about being misunderstood. Most people defend themselves because they fear the wrong story spreading. But Machiavelli saw this clearly. Narratives are controlled by those who stay composed long enough for others to doubt themselves. People assume the one who stays calm knows something they don't, and that assumption protects you. You don't rush to correct. You don't scramble to clarify. You let time do what emotion cannot. Time exposes exaggeration. Time reveals overreach. Time punishes impulsive accusations, and the person who stayed quiet appears solid by contrast. This is not manipulation. It's positioning. You are not trying to look innocent. You are refusing to look needy. Neediness is what invites control. Once you break that habit, defending yourself starts to feel unnecessary, even beneath you. Not because you're arrogant, because you're stable. And stability unnerves people who rely on reaction to feel powerful. They sense it. They adjust. They approach you differently. That's when you know the move worked. You didn't argue. You didn't prove anything. You didn't win a debate. You changed the dynamic. And that's the only thing that ever really mattered. From that point on, every interaction carries a new undertone. You're no longer someone to be pushed. You're someone to be considered. All because you made one quiet decision to stop defending yourself and let the discomfort do the work.